The New Orleans Saints have a lot of options at number 9 overall in this year's NFL draft, but perhaps the most shocking would be another project edge rusher. We got all that and a little bit of lanyap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're talking all number 9 the whole time. The New Orleans Saints have the number 9 overall selection in the first round. We'll dive into 2 immediate impact players that might not be the best players available, but could have an immediate impact for the team. We'll also take a look at 2 of the most realistic players that would be the best players available at number 9 that they could take. And we're going to lead everything off with the projects that they must avoid. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. You'll get $20 off your first purchase. The New Orleans Saints have a lot of options, but the thing that they must avoid is shocking the world and taking another project edge rusher in the first round. For what it's worth, I don't think that the Saints are going to go this route. We're actually going to go over a couple of shocking things. The thing is that a lot of the shocking things that the Saints could do at number 9 don't feel so shocking. But the top one that absolutely does is the idea of taking a project edge rusher. And there are a couple that could be tempting in this year's draft. Shemar Stewart out of Texas A&M, Mykel Williams out of Georgia. Both of those are names that a lot of people have connected to the New Orleans Saints in mock drafts and things like that. I wouldn't consider those substantial connections. It's a lot of musing and speculating about, well, Cam Jordan's career is going to end at some point. He's going into year 15. What are they going to do at edge rusher after that? Not one of those guys, ideally, is where the New Orleans Saints should be headed. Now, to be fair, the Saints would be in a unique situation to where they do have Chase Young, they do have Carl Granderson, and they still have Cameron Jordan. They could potentially see a leap from Isaiah Foskey, who should be in position to take a step forward this year in Brandon Staley's defensive system as opposed to Dennis Allen's defensive system, which should ask him to do a little bit more of the things that he did over at Notre Dame in that Viper role where he had 11 sacks in back-to-back seasons to finish his time with the Fighting Irish. And so you could have time for guys like Shemar Stewart and Mykel Williams to not just come in as projects that are expected to be the number 1 guy or the number 2 guy. It would be projects that can develop. But here's what we know about the New Orleans Saints. At number 9, they shouldn't be drafting somebody to sit back for a year. At least they shouldn't be drafting a non-quarterback to sit back for a year. Let's say it that way. That's something that, in my opinion, the New Orleans Saints absolutely should avoid. There are a lot of players they could select at number 9 that would have an immediate impact for this team and potentially would be the best players available on the team without being projects. And so I think that the Saints should be leaning into those names. Ashton Jeanty, to me, in my opinion, even as a running back, would be a better selection than a Shemar Stewart, than a Mykel Williams. Now, if those players are the selection at 9, I'll sit here and I'll tell you all the things that they can do and what they could potentially turn into, but we would be discussing all potential at that point. And I don't think that the New Orleans Saints, no shade at all to Mykel Williams, no shade at all to Shemar Stewart, I just don't think that the New Orleans Saints are in position to be able to properly support the growth of players in need of that kind of development, that are raw, that are coming in with low production numbers in the collegiate game and are now having to make the leap to the NFL level. To their credit, these aren't the same guys that are making leaps from lower levels of competition like Marcus Davenport, who was coming from the University of Texas, San Antonio, Peyton Turner, who was coming from Houston. Those were big leaps in competition for those guys. These are guys that are coming from SEC play. So I'll give them that credit, but it is all potential. And in my opinion, at this point, where the New Orleans Saints are in their life cycle, which is not the greatest part of the NFL life cycle, they should be focused more on what's proven, not what's possible. And look, there's always going to be projection in terms of trying to project how a player will be able to perform at the NFL level. And there's always going to be misses when it comes to that projection. But man, you sure do lessen your opportunity for swings and misses when you take the guys that have actually produced and when you take the guys that are a little bit more proven, at least at the collegiate level, transitioning over to the NFL level. So those project edge rushers to me are a type of selection that the New Orleans Saints must avoid at number 9. Another shocking way the New Orleans Saints could potentially go at number 9 is drafting a quarterback. However, that doesn't feel so shocking anymore, does it? Considering the situation that they've been in, considering the things that we have heard about where this team could be headed and what's going to happen at quarterback and where things are going post Derek Carr, continuing to bring in competition at the quarterback spot makes perfect sense. Do you need to do it at number 9? I don't know. But if Shedeur Sanders were to fall, then that makes sense. You send Rashid Shaheed up there because you want to get the card up to Roger Goodell so fast, right? So you have those opportunities to be able to potentially see a player fall to you that are worth taking at number 9. But is taking a Jackson Dart at number 9 going too early? That all depends on how much Kellen Moore likes him. He got an up close and personal look at him during Ole Miss's Pro Day. He went there himself to go and take a look at him. And so if he feels very highly about Jackson Dart, if the Saints feel very highly around Jackson Dart, that's one of the things that makes it feel not so shocking if they were to do that. I still think that even those two selections would be less shocking than that of the idea, I guess, of selecting a project edge rusher at number 9 overall. To me, that is an absolute must avoid for the New Orleans Saints. The other shocking thing that they could do is that several great players end up falling to them at 9 because let's say some team trades up and takes Jackson Dart early, and that leads to another playmaker falling down to the Saints at 9 because 3 quarterbacks go in the top 5 or whatever. Let's say something like that shocking and surprising happens. I don't foresee that happening, but let's say that happens. And then all of a sudden the Saints are sitting there and teams are willing to offer a bounty to get up at 9. I know the Saints haven't traded back since 2007. They did it in 2006, Sean Payton's first year. Could they do it here in 2025 in Kellen Moore's first year? If the board is right, it allows them to be able to move back a manageable amount of picks to where they still know they can get one of the 3 guys that they really like. And then they end up adding even more draft capital, ideally more draft capital within the top 100 and maybe even future selections in the top 100 to help them get up for a quarterback later in this draft or even in next year's draft, depending upon who's actually coming out and all those other things. A shocking scenario it would be because the New Orleans Saints have not traded back in nearly 2 decades in the NFL draft. But hey, they haven't taken a first-round quarterback since Archie Manning, and yet we're talking about that as if it's more possible than the thing that they haven't done in 18 years. I dare say that the thing, by average, just by law of numbers, the thing that hasn't happened in 18 years may be more likely to happen than the thing that hasn't happened since Archie Manning was drafted, right? And so I look at that as being another shocking scenario for the New Orleans Saints in round 1 that kind of isn't so shocking and might actually be smart depending upon how far back they're moving. So all 3 of those scenarios would be considered shocking. I would absolutely, and tell me if you disagree, but I would absolutely in those scenarios find drafting the project edge rusher that may or may not have an impact during his rookie contract. That, to me, would be the most shocking thing the New Orleans Saints can do at pick number 9. Coming up next, I want to get a little bit of help from a good friend, Damian Parson, who joined us over at the Ultimate New Orleans Sports Show, a partnership show between WWL and the Locked On Podcast Network, in terms of telling us who he thinks the 2 potential best players could be on the board for the New Orleans Saints at 9 realistically. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at Game Time, the absolute best place to go and the only place that I'll go when it comes to purchasing last-minute tickets. Sometimes I like doing things spontaneous, you know what I mean? Show off a little bit. Hey, baby, I got these concert tickets, you know what I'm saying? It's stuff like that. I absolutely love it. And so Game Time helps you be able to do that without breaking the bank. It could be our little secret. Don't worry about it. It's all good. It'll make you look really good, but it's just you and me. You ain't got nothing to worry about. So go ahead and download the Game Time app and take your boo out for something nice to do in the evening. You know what I'm saying? It's great. It's awesome. Seriously, like between sporting events and concerts and musicals, other theater shows, comedy, if you like stand-up as well. There's a ton that goes on. Obviously, if you're here in New Orleans or if you're elsewhere in other major cities or if you're traveling, it's a great resource as well. Game Time Picks curates all the biggest deals so you don't have to sift through thousands and thousands of different ticket prices, and all their transparency stuff is great too. So go and check them out today over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. You get $20 off your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints, we're discussing their selection at number 9 overall. We went through the things that would be shocking, actually kind of icky, right? Taking the project edge rusher, in the first round, something they haven't been able to really make good on in the past. And so now as we move past that, I want to take a look at what it is that's kind of the ideal situation for every NFL team. Go into free agency, spend a little bit of money, right? Spend a little bit of Skrilla, bring in some players that end up kind of plugging some of the holes on your roster, and then go into the draft ready to take the best player available at your selections. And for the New Orleans Saints at number 9, there are some realistically good best players available that could be there for them. And I happen to have the same opinion as my good friend Damian Parson over at the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast, who joined us over on the Ultimate New Orleans Sports Show, which is a partnership between Locked On Podcast Network and WWL. So I'm going to let you in on what it is that Damian had to say, and then we'll kind of break it down on our side. So here's what Doug Mouton, the sports director over at WWL, asked Damian, and Damian's answer when he was talking about some of the selections that are possible at number 9.
Two guys who you think, you know what, this makes sense and would work for the Saints. Damian, you first.
On offense, I would go to Tetairoa McMillan, the big wide receiver out of Arizona. I think that there's a chance that he could slip to them at 9. Carolina being right in front of them, needing defense badly. And they're honestly, from what I've heard, they're a candidate to trade down as well from the 8th spot. So if he falls past Carolina and he's on the board and Shador's gone and Cam's gone, yes, I run that card up because I think he's a great compliment to Chris Olave, to Rashid Shaheed. He's that big body ball winner that's a good route runner, kind of similar to what you had before everything kind of bottomed out with Michael Thomas.
Yeah,
I think
right.
that he could
and that bottomed out spectacularly.
That was a big bottom out too.
Who's your other guy?
It was bottom out. And for me, it's Mason Graham, the interior defensive line from Michigan. I think people are overthinking him with the arm length stuff. And trust me, I get it.
Boy.
But we don't win games on the tail of the tape. That's,
right.
You don't win boxing matches off the tail of the tape. It's not about having the reach. It's about using the reach. And when you watch the tape, you don't see a guy that gets engulfed by blocks. He double teams. He's 300. He puts it 310. His teammate is 340, and he's the one getting double teamed. I'm sorry. I'm not overthinking Mason Graham. So I think those are my 2 options. If I'm the New Orleans Saints at pick 9, if either one of them falls, I'm running that card up, and I'm being happy about it.
Being real happy about all that. Paralysis by analysis is a real thing that happens with some folks, and that certainly feels like it's what's happening with Mason Graham. I'm sorry, with Mason Graham. And by the way, Damian Parson, clearly where I got the analysis about the him getting double teamed more than his 340 pound teammate, because he said the same thing over on the Ultimate New Orleans Sports Show. So thanks, big thanks to Doug and Damian for helping to set that up. But I love this analysis from Damian because I do think that these are the 2 best players that could realistically be available for the New Orleans Saints at number 9, outside of that potentially suspected, but honestly very, in my opinion, unlikely, or not in my opinion, let me say in my expectation, right? Because my expectation can be very wrong here, but in the very commonly discussed idea of a Shedeur Sanders fall or slip, right? Because I don't think he gets past 9 if he gets there to 9, but we'll see. There's a chance that the Saints aren't super high on Shedeur Sanders, and maybe they're higher on Jackson Dart. Jackson Dart goes higher than Shedeur Sanders. What a crazy draft outcome that could potentially be. Like, those are some of the things that can always happen in the NFL draft. But leaving that alone, right? We're not here to predict bold strategies in the NFL draft. We're talking about the New Orleans Saints. These 2 guys are best player available. If they get there, I would throw Will Campbell, the offensive lineman out of LSU, in that mix as well. It's kind of the triumvirate or the trifecta of the 3 BPAs that could be there. And, some people would throw in Ashton Jinty. Some people would throw in Tyler Warren, but those guys I don't think would be shocking if they were there at 9. I think we all expect those guys to potentially be there at 9. These 3 players could be top 5 for all we know, right? Let's say that the Shedeur Sanders falls, right? That would mean that the very likely Cam Ward goes at number 1 to the Tennessee Titans. I don't think anything's going to change that. And by the way, I didn't mention the trade up for Cam Ward being the most shocking move because I'm talking about the most shocking things. We're focused on what could happen at 9, right? And so you could either trade back at 9 or you could make these drafts. But I left out the idea of a trade up. But obviously that would be shocking too. No doubt about it. So then let's say that Cam Ward goes number 1 to the Tennessee Titans. At number 2, Abdul Carter goes to the Cleveland Browns. That doesn't sound like that's too crazy of an idea at this point. And let's say that the Giants actually are all in on what they have with Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston for the next year or so, knowing that they probably have 2 more draft classes at which to swing at quarterback if they wanted to with that 2-year deal for Russell Wilson. Then they take Travis Hunter. Then what do you do at number 4 if you're the New England Patriots? You could trade back, but if you stick and pick because you're not getting the value you want, then off the board goes Will Campbell because you know the New England Patriots need help on their offensive line, especially for their young quarterback. So really, Will Campbell could be a top 5 guy. Mason Graham could be a top 5 guy. Tetairoa McMillan could be a top, let's call him 8 guy, right? The Carolina Panthers, like Damian mentioned, I think the Carolina Panthers are more likely to go defense. I think they want Bryce Young to carry something. And so you go on the defensive side and give him the opportunity to do that. And then you look at the guy up ahead of that, or the team up ahead of that, the New York Giants. They could go offense. They go offensive line. They can go defense. They could go Tetairoa McMillan as well. So he could be even as much as a top 7 selection in that case, right? So if you're New Orleans and either of those 3 guys falls to you, you're getting a potential top 5, top 7 selection at number 9. That's excellent. That's best player available material, and it's written all over it. The only question is, what's the evaluation that you have on Shedeur Sanders? What do the scouts feel about Shedeur Sanders? What does the staff feel about Shedeur Sanders? What does Jeff Ireland feel about Shedeur Sanders? And on top of most of that, what does Kellen Moore think about Shedeur Sanders? And then that would change everything else. Outside of that, Mason Graham, Tetairoa McMillan, and I'll add in Will Campbell are indeed absolutely the best players available that could be on the board for you at number 9. And either or any of those selections would make perfect sense for New Orleans. I think Mason Graham and Tetairoa McMillan make the most sense. Will Campbell, you got to do a little bit of configuring and moving around on the offensive line potentially there. But hey, you want to get one of the players that would be one of your best 5 players on your offensive line and then get your 5 players on the offensive line out there to heck with the actual position designation. You just want your best 5 offensive linemen, and that's the way to do that. But when it comes to those 2 players, Mason Graham, Tetairoa McMillan, game changers for you. Mason Graham, Brian Brzee would be a lot of fun. We broke down Mason Graham in yesterday's episode and the way that he would be able to contribute to a really aggressive pass rush that Brandon Staley is going to want, and his ability to be able to move around. You can play him at 3-4 end. You can play him at 4-3 defensive end. You can have him as a 3 tech, but he can serve as your NASCAR pass rusher along with Brian Brzee. You get those 2 edge rushers on the outside or an even front. That's a really, really good athletic, disruptive pass rush for you on a obvious passing situation in a 4-2-5 alignment and nickel defense. That's great. That's really good. Tetairoa McMillan immediately complements all the speed you now have at wide receiver, but you want that big body that's going to help you be a chain mover. Bang, Tetairoa McMillan's there for you. So I completely agree with Damian Parson here, and I add in Will Campbell as the 3 best players available that could be there for the New Orleans Saints at number 9. Up next, I want to give you 2 immediate impact players that could end up having that very much needed year 1, day 1 impact without necessarily being the best players available. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. 2 of the biggest impact players, without necessarily being the best players available on the board that could be there at number 9. I said 2. I'm probably going to give you 3 because we always do a little bit of lanyap here on Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much for being here. Don't forget, take a moment, like, subscribe, check us out, all that kind of stuff. We really hope that you're enjoying the shows here as we lead up to the NFL draft and much more on the way. Saints Squad show set to premiere next week. Ultimate New Orleans Sports Show continuing to come to you as well. Shared a clip of that earlier. So for me, the New Orleans Saints don't necessarily have to have like the best possible player available at 9 to still get an impact player. Let's say somehow or another, Tetairoa McMillan, Mason Graham, and Will Campbell are all off the board. Those would be your best possible players available at number 9, but you could still get a pretty good best player available in that scenario. So I want to give you 2, one on offense, one on defense, and I'll give you the land yap afterwards. One on offense for me, or actually I want to start on defense. Defense is James Pearce Jr. I mean, you look at what it is that Brandon Staley did with Leonard Floyd during his first year with the Los Angeles Rams back in 2020, 10 plus sacks that year, double-digit sacks. And then you look at what it is that James Pearce Jr., his build, how it is that he rushes, the way that he utilizes his athleticism and his speed off the edge, his ability to utilize as a stand-up edge rusher as well and contribute on run defense. He is almost, dare I say it, a perfect fit for Staley's defense. 10 sacks 2 years ago, led the SEC in 2023, 7.5 sacks last year, which also included 13 tackles for a loss last year, 15 tackles for a loss the year before that. Proven production, 19.5 sacks over the course of his first 3 seasons, even though he was on a more limited role back in 2022 as a freshman, and then ended up playing out 30 tackles for a loss as well. Added an interception touchdown at one point on a 52-yard return, and he comes in with great athletics numbers as well. Just somebody that can have a true immediate impact for you. And I think that that's the kind of player that you're looking for, even if it's not necessarily the best possible player that could have been there. James Pearce Jr. is the type of player that you can select at 9 and not have to worry about, what could have been had this player been on the board or that player been on the board, or they traded up for this or they traded up for that, or they took this instead. He could have an immediate impact for you. And listen, I'll be honest with you, there's been some questions about his character out there that have been on social media and all these other things. Doesn't seem like a big issue. Everyone that's covered the guy and everyone that's been around the guy says, I don't know what people are talking about. Is he a little difficult sometimes? Maybe, but if so, it's because he's a really good football player, and really good football players are sometimes difficult because they know exactly what they need to be successful, and they will not settle for less than that. And if that's the kind of thing that makes a guy like James Pearce Jr. difficult, bring it on. Bring it on. I want nothing more than a player that can come in to an organization and say, I know what I need to be great. And if you can't provide me that, I'm going to get it. No problem. All good. In fact, I'm going to make sure you don't even have to worry about that because we're going to give you exactly what you need to be great. So to me, James Pearce Jr. is absolutely that guy. 6'5", 250-ish pounds, great speed, good ability to bend, nice agility, works in the short area very well, can rush the passer, can defend the run, all these other things, high motor, high effort player, blah, 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 blah. Checks all the boxes to be a top 10 producer. So you might as well make him a top 10 pick if it makes sense at that spot, depending upon who else is on the board. Let's look over in the offensive side, a guy that I think could be a solid top 10 selection, Tyler Warren. Listen, when I talk about Tyler Warren as a guy, I'm talking about him as a guy, as a football player, a dude that's going to be able to come in and have that impact. And listen, Tyler Warren's somebody that I've changed the tune on because I was looking at him like, oh, he's a tight end. You don't draft tight ends in the first round. Well, no, not necessarily. This isn't that situation. 104 receptions, 1,233 receiving yards, 8 receiving touchdowns, 26 rushing attempts, 218 rushing yards, 4 touchdowns. And he also completed 3 passes for 35 yards and threw a touchdown last year. Nothing about that just says tight end. Everything about that, however, says impact. Impact, impact, impact. And look, it could be Colston Loveland too. If you're higher on Colston Loveland than you are of Tyler Warren. But I'll tell you what, when it comes to Tyler Warren, it's proven in terms of him being an impact player. And when we spoke to Kellen Moore Tuesday morning out at the annual meeting, one of the things that he said was that he's more worried about the impact that a player brings than he is concerned about the position that player has that impact. He likes to look at skill position players as skill position players, not necessarily running back, fullback, tight end, wide receiver, slot receiver, outside receiver, inline tight end, wide tight end, F move tight end. He ain't worried about that. He's worried about who's going to have impact as a skill position player. And so a guy like Tyler Warren, and by the way, when I asked him that question, all I asked about was positional value. I didn't preface anything about running back or offense or anything like that. He's the one that specifically went to the offense and started talking about the ability to be able to impact from multiple positions and tight ends and wide receivers and running backs. So he's the one that put it in the offensive scheme. And so maybe that hints a little bit to the subconscious thinking about a Tyler Warren and all the ways that he could have an impact despite the fact that he's a tight end. I'm not drafting a tight end top 10. I'm drafting Tyler Warren top 10 if I take him. And that's absolutely something I, as an organization, will be willing to plant my flag with. You run every risk, no matter how sure you are, you run every risk of failing in every NFL draft with every NFL draft selection. It is the NFL draft. That is part of the risk. And you're required to do it. You got to go in there. You got to make picks. You don't have a choice. It's not something you're doing optionally. You got to do it. And so when you take those risks, you take those risks. But you might as well be as sure as you can when you're making that selection. And I think Tyler Warren is a sure thing as an impact player on offense, as a playmaker. I don't care about the two letters that are next to his name. So I think he would be an immediate impact player with you, even though he might not necessarily be the best player available, best player possible that could be available at number 9, like the other guys that we talked about before. Finally, Jahdae Barron, the versatile corner, versatile defensive back, let me say, coming out of Texas. People keep saying that he's a slot corner. No, he can be, but he could also be an outside corner. He could also be a free safety. He could also be a strong safety. He could play down in the box for you. All these other things. He has played almost exclusively, when it comes to corner, played almost exclusively wide corner, but he did take some snaps in the box. He's taken like over 100 snaps in the box last year. High character guy, locker room leader, positional leader. You're not drafting a slot corner at number 9 if you take Jahdae Barron. You can put him there if you want to, don't get me wrong, but you're drafting a bona fide number 1 guy if you want to do that, to pair up with Kool-Aid McKinstry, to add for Alontae Taylor, to keep Alontae Taylor in what's going to be that star role where Brandon Staley can really let him go. No issue with that. Now, could you go later for a Noel Williams out of California, or a Za Frazier out of UTSA, or a Kobe Bryant, or a Trey Amos who's like Paulson Adebo 2? Yeah, of course you can. You can do that later. But I'm just saying, if you take a guy like Jahdae Barron at 9, I think it's a solid selection for you. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode, I want to continue to take a look at some of the other scenarios around the New Orleans Saints in this upcoming draft, including some of the trade-up options, including, yes, trading up to number 1 for Cam Ward. We got that coming up for you in tomorrow's episode. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know what the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.